The church froze when Camila disappeared. Her bouquet lay on the marble floor like a body at a crime scene, and Ryan, my cousin's groom, stood abandoned at the altar, fury carved into every line of his face. Whispers filled the air, people craning their necks, hungry for scandal. Then all eyes turned to me. "Isabel," my aunt snapped, shoving me forward. "Save the family. Take her place." My stomach dropped. I wasn't the chosen one, never had been. But suddenly I was walking down the aisle, every step dragging me closer to a man who looked like he'd rather burn than say my name. Ryan's glare locked onto me, his voice low and sharp. "You?" The priest faltered, the guests gasped, and I forced myself not to look away. "Looks like you don't have another option," I shot back, hating the way my pulse jumped when his eyes narrowed. Minutes later, the vows were spoken, and just like that, I became the bride. His backup plan. The car ride to his penthouse was silent, the air between us coiled tight. When he finally closed the door behind us, he loosened his tie and turned, every word laced with venom. "You think this makes you my wife?" He stepped closer, towering over me, his fury radiating. "You're nothing but a stand-in." My heart pounded, but I refused to shrink back. "Then why?" I asked quietly, lifting my chin. "Do you look at me like you can't stand it?" His jaw clenched, his hand braced against the wall beside me, his body trapping mine in place. The distance between us narrowed, his breath hot against my cheek, his shadow swallowing me whole, until there was nowhere left to run. His shadow swallowed me whole, his body caging me against the wall, and the only sound in the room was the steady thud of my own heartbeat. Ryan wasn't touching me, not yet, but the heat of him pressed in, suffocating, his breath brushing against my cheek like fire. I refused to look away. If I did, I'd give him the victory he wanted. So I tilted my chin higher, forcing my spine straight, refusing to let my voice crack. That had always been the thing between us, this unspoken current, a friction that sparked whenever our eyes met. Long before Camila ever wore his ring, before my aunt ever whispered my name like a curse, Ryan and I had circled each other at family gatherings, in hallways, at dinners. Never enough to call it attraction, but always enough to make the air feel charged, like a storm waiting to break. He noticed me, even when he pretended not to. And I noticed him, even when I told myself I shouldn't. That dangerous familiarity now pulsed between us, raw and unfiltered, in the silence of his penthouse. "You'll regret this," he finally muttered, the words dripping like venom, though his lips hovered close enough that the threat vibrated through me more than it reached my ears. Then he pushed off the wall, stepping back with a sharp exhale, loosening his tie as though he needed to rid himself of the noose that was me. His jacket hit the couch, and he crossed to the bar without a glance in my direction. I stood frozen, my hand pressed against the wall to steady myself, every nerve in my body alive. "Don't think for a second," he said, pouring a drink with a clink of ice against crystal, "that this changes who you are. You're still the spare. The afterthought." His voice was smooth, but the way his hand tightened around the glass betrayed the storm under the surface. The words stung more than I wanted to admit, but I refused to let them sink into my skin. "Funny," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel, "because I seem to be the one standing here wearing your ring." I lifted my hand, the diamond flashing in the dim light. His gaze flicked toward it, sharp and cutting, then back to my face. For a moment, his expression faltered, like he hated the truth of it even more than he hated me. "You think you're clever," he said, swallowing the drink in one smooth tilt of his head. "But you're nothing more than a mistake I was forced into." "Maybe," I answered softly, stepping forward, matching his energy even though my pulse was unsteady. "But you don't look like a man who hates being trapped." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. His jaw ticked, his eyes darkened, and I knew I had struck something very deep. Because Ryan didn't hate me, he hated what I represented. The humiliation of Camila running, the scandal of marrying her cousin, the whispers of society that would follow him like vultures. But underneath all that fury, there was something else in his stare, something that burned just as hot as my own defiance. He set the glass down with deliberate care, then crossed the room in 3 strides. His hand braced against the wall beside my head, his body leaning in close enough that his scent, expensive cologne laced with whiskey, wrapped around me. "You think this is a game?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. I swallowed hard, my heart slamming in my chest. "I think you're afraid," I whispered. The way his eyes darkened at that word, the way his breath caught for just a fraction of a second, it was proof I wasn't wrong. Ryan might have been the groom abandoned at the altar, the man forced to marry his fiancée's cousin, but he wasn't untouched by this. He felt the same heat I did, even if he'd rather die than admit it. He leaned closer, so close the space between us was a knife's edge. His lips hovered near mine, not touching, not closing the distance, but lingering like a cruel temptation. My body betrayed me, every nerve reaching toward him, every muscle tense with the desire to move, or to run. I didn't know which. Then, just as suddenly, he pulled back. "Don't mistake chemistry for choice," he said coldly, his mask snapping back into place. "This marriage is nothing more than damage control. Remember that." He turned and strode down the hall toward the bedroom, his shoulders taut, his presence filling the space even in his absence. I stood there, trembling, my hand clutching the wall behind me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just Isabel, the cousin in the background, the forgotten one. I was his wife. And whatever this was between us, this fire, this fury, it was only just beginning. The morning after felt like waking up in the middle of a war zone. I hadn't slept, not with the memory of Ryan's eyes burning into me before he stalked off to the other side of the penthouse. He hadn't touched me, hadn't even said goodnight. But the way he'd leaned in, the heat of his breath, the tension in his body, it haunted me in the dark. Now, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling over a dining table set for 2. Ryan was already there, in a crisp suit as if nothing had happened, sipping black coffee like he hadn't nearly crushed me against the wall last night. His eyes flicked up when I entered, and for a moment I thought I imagined the way they lingered. Then his mouth curved into a cruel smirk. "Get used to the view," he said, gesturing at the city skyline, his tone mocking. "It's the only thing you'll be married to in this penthouse." I sat opposite him, refusing to let his words sting. "That's fine," I said evenly, reaching for the cup the maid had set for me. "It's a better view than your back." His eyes sharpened at the jab, and the corner of his mouth twitched like he almost wanted to laugh, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, tilting his head as he studied me. "You've grown teeth overnight," he murmured. "Guess desperation does that." My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to meet his stare. "If I'm desperate, then so are you. After all, you married me." His smirk dropped, and for a heartbeat, silence crackled between us, heavy and electric. He set his cup down with deliberate care, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Don't flatter yourself, Isabel. This wasn't a marriage. It was a salvage operation. You're just the unfortunate stand-in who got dragged along for the ride." His voice was sharp, but his eyes betrayed something else, a flicker of frustration that went deeper than simple disdain. It made me want to push harder, to see what lay under that mask of his. "Then let's hope," I said softly, "that your stand-in does a better job of being your wife than your first choice ever did." His eyes darkened at that, his jaw flexing, and I felt the shift immediately. The words had landed, harder than I expected, and the table between us suddenly felt too small, too fragile to hold the weight of what passed in his stare. He pushed his chair back, standing with a quiet scrape of wood on marble. He circled the table, stopping just behind my chair, his presence a shadow that prickled down my spine. "Careful," he murmured near my ear, his voice low and dangerous. "You're playing with fire you don't understand." I turned slightly, tilting my head to catch his gaze, forcing myself not to flinch. "Or maybe," I whispered, "you're just afraid I understand it too well." His breath hitched, so faint I almost missed it. Then he straightened, stepping back, and the moment snapped like glass. He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door, his voice cool and detached. "Don't wait up tonight. The click of the lock echoed through the empty penthouse, leaving me alone at the table, my pulse still racing. For all his words about mistakes and stand-ins, one thing was clear: Ryan wasn't indifferent. He burned, even if he hated himself for it. And if he thought I'd sit quietly as his backup plan, he was about to learn that I was no one's second choice. High society thrived on scandal, and ours was the kind of scandal that lit up every chandelier in every ballroom across the city. It didn't matter that I hadn't asked for any of it, that I'd been shoved into the spotlight like a pawn. Overnight, I became the headline. Isabel Moreno, the cousin who replaced the bride. The whispers slithered wherever I went. I could feel them in the way people's eyes slid across me, in the too sweet smiles from women who clutched champagne glasses like daggers, in the way men laughed behind their hands as if I couldn't hear. They called me desperate, shameless, pitiful. Ryan's mistake. But if they thought I was going to shrink under the weight of their stares, they didn't know me at all. I had spent my entire life in Camila's shadow, living in the afterglow of her beauty, her charm, her effortless ability to catch every eye in a room. I had learned silence, learned invisibility, learned how to listen when no one realized I was paying attention. And now, for the first time, I wasn't invisible anymore. At a gala 2 weeks after the wedding, the ballroom was dripping in gold and silk, strings of violins weaving through the chatter. I wore a gown that wasn't chosen for me by anyone else, scarlet, cut daringly low, my hair swept up to bare my shoulders. Heads turned when I walked in, and I felt the weight of every stare, the judgment sharpened into knives. But I also saw the flickers of surprise. Because no one expected Isabel, the stand-in bride, to look like this. And Ryan noticed. He was across the room, surrounded by executives and allies, his tall frame cutting a striking silhouette in his tailored suit. His eyes found me almost instantly, and for a moment, the world slowed. He didn't look away. His stare lingered, heated, assessing, like he didn't know whether he wanted to drag me out of the room or keep me right where I was. The corner of my mouth lifted, and I let him see it. If I was going to be mocked, I would do it while owning the fire. When I finally crossed the room, people parted with whispers trailing behind me. I stopped beside him, placing a glass of champagne in his hand that I had snagged from a passing tray. "You're welcome," I murmured smoothly, ignoring the shock on the faces around us. Ryan's jaw tightened, his gray eyes cutting to mine. "You're enjoying this," he said under his breath. "Let them talk." I sipped my own glass, meeting his glare without flinching. "They already are. Better to give them something worth whispering about." His gaze lingered, like he couldn't decide if he wanted to throttle me or pull me closer. One of the board members, a man with a sly smile, leaned in and said, "Your wife is bold, Ryan. Quite the replacement." The word hung in the air like poison. My spine stiffened, but before I could speak, Ryan's hand slid to the small of my back, firm and possessive. He smiled at the man with a chill that could freeze glass. "Bold," Ryan repeated, his tone silk over steel. "That's why she's my wife." The man laughed awkwardly and excused himself. Ryan's hand didn't move. His grip burned through the fabric of my dress, making my heart hammer against my ribs. "Don't mistake that for affection," he murmured into my ear, his lips brushing close enough to make me shiver. "I don't play the part of a fool in public." I leaned closer, matching his dangerous calm. "And what part are you playing now?" His eyes locked on mine, dark and stormy, before he abruptly pulled back. The rest of the night, he stayed near me, too near, as though keeping me within reach was safer than letting me drift free. And yet, when we returned to the penthouse, the mask cracked. He poured another drink, his tie loose, his mood darker than the city skyline outside the window. "You enjoy being paraded around," he said, swirling the glass. "You like being what they talk about." I dropped my clutch on the table, my gown whispering against the floor. "I don't enjoy it," I answered. "But if they're going to mock me, I might as well make them choke on it." He studied me, his jaw flexing. The silence stretched, heavy with something unspoken. Then he crossed the room, stopping just inches away. His hand caught my chin, tilting my face up to his. His eyes were fire, his voice low and rough. "You're not the woman I thought you were." My breath caught, my pulse quickening at the dangerous honesty in his tone. I held his stare, my own voice steady despite the chaos inside me. "And you're not the man you pretend to be." His grip tightened slightly, and the space between us felt like it might shatter. His thumb brushed my jaw, his breath warm against my skin. For a heartbeat, it felt like he might close the distance, like all the fury and denial between us might ignite into something neither of us could take back. But then he released me abruptly, stepping away as if burned, his back rigid. "Don't push me, Isabel," he said, his voice cold again. He didn't look back as he left the room, the door slamming like a gunshot. I stood frozen, my heart racing, my skin tingling where he had touched me. For all his hatred, for all his talk of mistakes and stand-ins, Ryan had cracked. And I had seen it, the truth he was trying so hard to bury. He didn't hate me. He was afraid of how much he didn't. It didn't take long for the vultures to circle. High society fed on weakness, and Ryan's humiliation was the juiciest feast they'd had in years. At every event, every dinner, every gathering, Camila's name was whispered just loudly enough for me to hear. The runaway bride. The one he truly wanted. And me, the consolation prize, the mistake he couldn't undo. But what they didn't expect was how quickly I learned to play the game. Ryan might have thought he could keep me in the background, but I had no intention of being anyone's shadow again. At a dinner hosted by one of his business rivals, the air was thick with false laughter and sharper intent. Ryan walked in with his usual icy authority, every inch the powerful air, but the stares that followed us were poisonous. I could feel the weight of them, the silent mockery, the smug certainty that Ryan had been forced to marry beneath him. When the rival's wife leaned close to whisper, "You must be nervous stepping into your cousin's shoes," I smiled sweetly and let my voice carry just far enough to be overheard. "Not at all. Shoes are replaceable. What matters is who stands beside him." The woman blinked, her smile faltering, and I caught the flicker of pride in Ryan's eyes before he masked it. But I wasn't finished. Over dinner, the rival tried to embarrass Ryan, questioning his family's latest project, mocking the scandal that had tainted our wedding. Before Ryan could respond, I leaned in, cutting the man off with a calm, deliberate smile. "If memory serves," I said, my tone light but sharp, "your last 3 projects failed spectacularly. Perhaps that's why you're so interested in ours, you're hoping to learn how success looks from the inside." Laughter rippled down the table, sharp and merciless. The rival's face flushed crimson, and Ryan's hand tightened around his glass. But it wasn't anger I saw when he glanced at me, it was heat, fierce and unexpected. Later, as we left the dinner, the silence between us was charged. The city lights blurred past the car windows, but I felt his stare on me more than the glow outside. "You enjoyed that," he finally said, his voice low. I turned, meeting his eyes. "I enjoyed reminding them I'm not a stand-in." His jaw flexed, his stare lingering longer than it should have. He didn't speak again, but his silence was louder than words. That night, when we returned to the penthouse, the tension followed us inside. He poured his usual drink, his back to me, but I felt the question hanging between us. Why had I defended him? Why did I fight like I belonged? I walked past him, close enough that my shoulder brushed his arm, and said softly, "If I fall, they'll drag you down with me. It's in your best interest to let me stand tall." His hand caught my wrist before I could step away. I froze, the warmth of his grip searing into my skin. Slowly, I turned to face him. His eyes were darker than I'd ever seen them, the mask stripped away, leaving something raw and dangerous beneath. "You think I need you to protect me?" he asked, his voice barely more than a growl. My pulse hammered, but I held his stare. "I think you hate how much you already do." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. His grip tightened, his breath harsh in the silence, and the space between us shrank until every nerve in my body screamed. His gaze dropped to my lips, lingering there, heavy and loaded. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. And then, just as suddenly, he let go, stepping back like the contact had burned him. Go to bed, he said, his voice clipped, his control snapping back into place. But the crack was there, no matter how hard he tried to hide it. I walked away without another word, but inside, my blood was still racing, my thoughts tangled with the dangerous truth. Ryan didn't want me. He wanted to hate me. But wanting and hating were starting to blur, and one of us was going to break. The breaking point came on a night when neither of us planned it. The tension had been coiling for weeks, wound tighter with every cutting remark, every brush of his hand, every glance that lingered too long. We lived in the same penthouse like enemies forced into a cage, circling, waiting for one of us to strike. And when it finally happened, it wasn't gentle, it was an explosion. It started with an argument, sharp and sudden, over something trivial. A gala invitation left on the counter, the implication that I was expected to attend without question. "You're not dragging me into another one of your spectacles," I said, crossing my arms. Ryan's head snapped up from where he stood, phone in hand. "My spectacles?" His voice was ice. "Do you think you get to choose when you show your face? You exist in this marriage because of me. Don't forget that." My blood boiled, the anger bubbling up from somewhere I couldn't hold back anymore. "Because of you?" "No, Ryan. Because your perfect bride ran and left you standing like a fool. I'm the reason you didn't collapse in front of all of them. I saved you." His eyes darkened dangerously, his phone hitting the counter with a sharp crack. In 2 strides he was in front of me, his body towering, his fury radiating. "Saved me?" he hissed. "You think wearing her dress makes you anything but my replacement?" My heart pounded, but I refused to flinch. "No," I snapped back, my voice shaking with rage, not fear. "But every time you look at me like that, every time you can't stop yourself from coming closer, you prove I'm not a replacement either. I'm the one standing here. And you hate it because you feel it too." The words sliced through the air, and for a moment, the silence was louder than the shouting. His jaw flexed, his breath ragged, and then it happened, he grabbed me. His hands slammed against the wall on either side of me, caging me in, his face inches from mine. "You don't know what you're talking about," he growled, but his eyes betrayed him. They burned, locked on me with a hunger that contradicted every word. My pulse thundered, my body trembling with something I didn't want to name. "Then prove me wrong," I whispered, my voice daring, reckless. His control snapped. His mouth crashed against mine, the kiss harsh, furious, all teeth and fire. It wasn't tender, it wasn't careful, it was war, years of resentment and denial combusting in one searing moment. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as I hated myself for wanting it. His grip slid to my waist, his fingers digging in like he couldn't bear to let go. The world spun, the wall pressing into my back, his body pressed hard against mine, every inch of him demanding, consuming. When he finally broke the kiss, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathless, shaking. His voice was raw, a whisper scraped from the bottom of his chest. "This changes nothing." I swallowed hard, forcing the words past the chaos inside me. "Then why," I breathed, "does it feel like it changes everything?" His hand trembled where it gripped me, his chest rising and falling against mine, but he didn't answer. Because he couldn't. We both knew the truth, whatever this was between us, it wasn't going away. It was only getting stronger. And no amount of hatred could smother it now. The morning after our kiss, everything was different, yet nothing had changed. Ryan was colder than ever, as if by pretending the fire hadn't sparked, he could smother it before it consumed us both. He left early for meetings, his expression carved from stone, but I caught the faint tremor in his hand when he set down his coffee cup. He didn't say a word to me. He didn't have to. The silence itself was a confession. By noon, the whispers reached me, Camila was back. She had returned to the city with the man she'd run off with, scandal clinging to her name like smoke. And yet, somehow, she had the audacity to call. Her voice oozed through the line, sweet and sharp. "Isabel. Playing dress up in my shoes suits you, doesn't it?" I gripped the phone, my knuckles white, my tone even. Funny. I don't remember you walking down the aisle. She laughed, airy and cruel. Don't get too comfortable. Ryan doesn't belong to you. He never did. The call ended, but the venom lingered, curling through my veins. That night, she proved she wasn't bluffing. She showed up at the same gala Ryan and I attended, gliding in on the arm of her new lover, as if she hadn't abandoned everything just weeks before. The ballroom stilled when she appeared, gasps rippling, whispers doubling. And Ryan, he froze. His jaw clenched, his shoulders rigid, his eyes locked on her like a man watching a ghost. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face smooth, lifting my glass with deliberate calm. Camila's eyes found us instantly. She didn't look at me, not really. I was a prop in her game, an obstacle she thought she could shove aside. She went straight to Ryan, her smile sweet poison. You look well, she purred, ignoring me at his side. Did you miss me? The audacity made my blood boil, but what cut deepest was the flicker in Ryan's eyes, the shadow of what they had been. Before I could react, before I could prove I wouldn't be invisible again, I felt her hand brush his arm. And that's when I did what none of them expected. I stepped between them. My smile was calm, sharp enough to draw blood. You dropped something, I said, tilting my head toward the ring on my finger, the one she had abandoned. Don't worry, Camila. I'll take good care of it. Gasps followed, heads turned, and for the first time, Camila's composure faltered. Ryan's eyes snapped to me, his lips parting like he didn't know whether to stop me or pull me closer. Later, when we were alone in the car, the silence was a storm. His hands gripped the wheel too tightly, his jaw taut with tension. You didn't have to do that, he said at last, his voice low. Yes, I did, I replied, my gaze fixed out the window. Because if you won't choose, then I will. I won't be the woman who hides behind her cousin's shadow. His head turned sharply toward me, his eyes burning, but the words he wanted didn't come. Instead, he drove in silence, his knuckles white, his chest rising with uneven breaths. When we arrived at the penthouse, he followed me inside, closing the door harder than necessary. His voice broke the quiet, raw and unguarded. She was supposed to be mine. I turned, my heart racing, my words sharper than I intended. And yet here you are with me. Maybe you should ask yourself why. His steps closed the distance between us, his eyes stormy, his body tense. Don't push me, Isabel. But his warning came too late. We were already standing on the edge, one heartbeat away from falling. Camila didn't vanish after that night. If anything, she became bolder, circling like a vulture, testing how far she could push before Ryan gave in. She called, she lingered at events, she let her new lover trail behind her like a pet while she tried to claw her way back into Ryan's orbit. And the cruelest part was how much the world wanted her to succeed. To them, I was still the mistake, the woman who had stolen another bride's place. They wanted Ryan to return to the narrative they adored, the golden couple, restored. But I wasn't planning to hand him back. If Ryan thought he could treat me as a placeholder, if Camila thought she could reclaim what she had abandoned, they were both about to learn that I had no intention of being erased again. I began to move strategically. At dinners, I charmed the allies Ryan had underestimated me with. I remembered names, recalled details, made allies feel seen in a way Camila never had. At a charity auction, I bid boldly against one of Ryan's rivals and won, turning the crowd's whispers into applause. Each move I made, I felt Ryan's eyes on me, watching, assessing, burning with something he wouldn't admit. The more I stepped out of Camila's shadow, the more I saw the cracks in his armor. One night, we returned from a gala where I had outmaneuvered a particularly vicious critic. Ryan had stood back and let me take the floor, but the moment we were alone, he cornered me in the hallway of the penthouse, his hand braced against the wall beside my head. You're playing a dangerous game, he said, his voice low, his breath hot. I tilted my chin, refusing to shrink back. And what game is that? Proving I'm not your mistake? His eyes darkened, his chest rising unevenly. proving you're not just my wife in name. My pulse quickened, my skin tingling where his presence pressed too close. Maybe I am, I whispered, reckless, daring. His jaw flexed, and his lips hovered near mine, so close I could feel the heat radiating. For a moment, it felt inevitable, like the only thing left between us was surrender. But he pulled back sharply, his eyes shuddering. Careful, he warned, his voice rough. Careful with what? I pressed. With wanting me? His silence was louder than any denial. Days later, the tension reached a boiling point when Camila confronted me at a luncheon, her voice pitched to Carrie. You think wearing my ring makes you his choice? Isabel, you'll always be nothing more than my substitute. The room quieted, all ears waiting for my response. I stood slowly, letting my gaze sweep across the crowd before landing on her. Funny, I said coolly, holding up my hand so the diamond glittered under the light. I don't remember substitutes keeping the spotlight this long. Laughter broke out, sharp and merciless, and Camila's face twisted with rage. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Ryan watching me. Not with disdain, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. Possession. That night, when we returned home, he didn't bother with distance. He poured no drink, offered no words. He just stepped into my space, his eyes locked on mine like I was the only thing he could see. And in that moment, I realized the balance had shifted. I wasn't the backup anymore. I was the fire he couldn't put out, the storm he couldn't control. Ryan's control finally snapped the night after the luncheon. We had barely stepped into the penthouse before he slammed the door shut behind us, his hand braced against it like he needed to hold the world at bay. His tie was loose, his hair slightly mussed, and his eyes, those gray eyes that had always been cold, were blazing with something raw and unrestrained. You think you've won, don't you? His voice was low, rough, each word heavy with restrained fury. I dropped my clutch on the table and faced him squarely. I don't have to think it, Ryan. You can't stop looking at me long enough to deny it. His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For a moment, I thought he'd step back, retreat into the icy mask he always wore. But he didn't. He stalked toward me instead, each step deliberate, predatory, until my back pressed against the edge of the table. His presence crowded me, his chest brushing mine, his breath hot against my skin. You drive me insane, he hissed, his hand sliding to the small of my back, holding me there as if he'd finally admitted he couldn't let go. You walk into rooms like you own them, like you were born to be in my world, and everyone is eating out of your hand. I should hate it, I should hate you, but I can't stop wanting more. His confession hit me like a strike to the chest. My own pulse pounded, my hands trembling as I pressed them to his chest, feeling the rapid thud of his heartbeat beneath my palms. Then stop fighting it, I whispered, my voice a dare, reckless and trembling all at once. His gaze dropped to my lips, and the space between us disappeared. His mouth crashed against mine, and the kiss was nothing like the first. This wasn't anger, this wasn't denial. This was fire, scorching and desperate, years of restraint unraveling in a single, devastating moment. I kissed him back with the same hunger, my fingers curling into his shirt as his hands slid up my sides, gripping me like I was the only anchor left. We stumbled toward the bedroom, the world blurring, our lips never parting, the tension between us snapping into something darker, deeper. When we fell onto the bed, his weight pressing me into the mattress, his mouth trailing down my neck, I realized there was no going back. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't desperation. This was inevitable. Hours later, when the city lights had faded into dawn, I lay tangled in the sheets, his arm draped heavily across my waist. His breathing was steady, his body warm against mine, but my thoughts were anything but calm. Because as much as my body ached for him, as much as my heart hammered with something dangerously close to hope, I knew Ryan was a man who could turn tenderness into cruelty in the blink of an eye. And I was right. When he woke, his eyes lingered on me for only a moment before his expression hardened again, the walls snapping back into place. Don't read into this, he said coldly, sitting up and dragging a hand through his hair. The words were sharp, but they didn't erase the memory of how he had clung to me hours before, how he had whispered my name like a vow in the dark. I pushed myself up, the sheet slipping around me, my voice steady despite the sting in my chest. "Don't worry, Ryan. I know exactly what this was." His gaze flicked to mine, searching, almost hesitant, before he turned away. But I caught it, that crack in his armor, the guilt and longing he couldn't hide fast enough. He might have told himself it meant nothing, but I knew better. For all his pride, for all his cruelty, Ryan had crossed a line. He had claimed me. And no matter how hard he tried to fight it, he couldn't undo it now. The fallout came quickly. Camila's return hadn't just stirred gossip, it had ignited a full-blown storm. She spun her story to anyone who would listen, painting herself as the wronged woman who had been deceived by her own cousin. The tabloids ate it up, their headlines dripping with scandal. Runaway bride returns to reclaim what was hers. And everywhere we went, people looked at me like I was the thief. Ryan didn't speak of that night in the bedroom, didn't acknowledge the truth we both knew, but the shift between us was undeniable. He hovered closer at events, his hand lingering at the small of my back, his gaze sharper whenever another man dared approach me. He could claim I was a stand-in all he wanted, his actions betrayed him. But it wasn't until a charity gala weeks later that everything broke wide open. Camila arrived in a gown designed to draw attention, her lover trailing dutifully at her side, and for the first time since her return, she didn't aim for subtlety. She crossed the ballroom straight toward us, her chin high, her smile painted like armor. "Ryan," she purred, ignoring me completely, "we need to talk." The crowd hushed, sensing blood. I stepped forward, placing myself firmly between them. "No," I said coolly, my voice carrying. "You've done enough talking. You ran, you abandoned him, and now you want to pretend you can waltz back into his life as if nothing happened." Her smile faltered, eyes narrowing. "This doesn't concern you, Isabel. You were never meant to be in this picture." My laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "And yet here I am, his wife, standing beside him while you stand here with nothing but a story no one believes." The ballroom erupted in whispers, cameras flashing. Camila's mask cracked, her composure unraveling. She turned on Ryan, her voice shrill. "Tell her. Tell everyone she means nothing, that she was just a mistake forced on you." The entire room held its breath, waiting. Ryan's gaze cut to me, his jaw tight, his eyes stormy. For a moment, I braced for the betrayal, for him to take the easy path and cast me aside. But he didn't. He reached for my hand instead, threading his fingers through mine, lifting it high enough for everyone to see the diamond glinting under the chandeliers. His voice was steady, cold, commanding. "You're right, Camila. She wasn't meant to be in the picture." He paused, his gaze never leaving mine. "She is the picture. The only one that matters." Gasps rippled through the room. My breath caught in my chest, my pulse roaring in my ears. Camila's face drained of color, her lips trembling before she spun on her heel and fled, her lover scrambling after her. The room erupted, but I heard nothing but the pounding of my own heartbeat as Ryan pulled me closer, his lips brushing my ear. "You wanted proof," he murmured, his voice rough. "Now you have it." My knees nearly buckled, the weight of his words crashing over me. I had spent weeks fighting, clawing, proving I wasn't a shadow. And now, in front of everyone, Ryan had chosen me, not as a backup, not as a mistake, but as his only plan. The ballroom erupted, voices rising like waves, but in that moment I only saw him. Ryan, the man who had once looked at me like I was an inconvenience, now holding my hand like it was the only thing tethering him to the ground. The man who had called me a stand-in, a mistake, a spare, now declaring me in front of everyone as the one he chose. My chest tightened, my throat thick, because for the first time, it wasn't just for appearances. His grip was too firm, his eyes too unguarded, his words too raw to be anything but truth. Later, when the lights dimmed and the noise of the night had faded, we returned to the penthouse in silence. I expected him to retreat into himself again, to build up the walls he always hid behind. But instead, he stopped just inside the door, turning to face me with an expression I had never seen before. Vulnerable. Uncertain. "I never wanted this," he admitted quietly, his voice stripped of arrogance, of venom. "Not like this. But somewhere between hating you and trying to fight what I felt, you became the only thing I can't imagine losing." His words struck deep, unraveling the last knot of doubt in my chest. I stepped closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then stop fighting." For once, he didn't. He cupped my face in his hands, his lips finding mine, not with anger, not with desperation, but with something softer, something that tasted dangerously like hope. And in that moment, I knew the truth. I had never been his backup plan. Not anymore. I was his only plan, his present, his future. His everything.